what is the divine? This question can be approached from many sides, many angles. It can be approached intellectually, so to say, psychologically, yogically. So let's see how there are different ways of approaching it, and let's see how an intellectual would approach, because that comes nearest to us. From an intellectual standpoint, one thing is very clear, that all that we see in this universe and all that we do not see, yet do not see, there has to be a source and an origin. The material scientists speak of a material energy which is behind all these material objects, of a play of forces which sustains this visible material universe. And we can say at one point that there is a source and origin, a single source from which all this material universe has emerged. But then the question is pushed back to the next level. If this universe was only material, we can stop with this answer. But this universe is not just material, it is also living. So the next question is, where does a living material universe or living forms come within it? And so on and so forth. We have this very beautifully given in a story form in one of the Upanishads, where Bhrigu, son of Varuni, asks him, what is the eternal? And his father tells him, you meditate and come back and tell me your findings. So like a material scientist, he reflects and says, well, the divine is matter, annam brahmeti. That's the answer which many of us give. Now the beauty of this story is that his father does not negate it, but he says, meditate further. So quite naturally the young boy sees that there is not just material universe but living forms in it. And eventually it is the living forms, though they have emerged out of matter, they are the ones who move matter. They are like, they move this bodily instrument and many other bodies that we see in this universe. From a certain standpoint, we can even experience this material universe as expanding and contracting as if it's a living universe. We use the word open system. And so he comes back and says, Pranam Brahmeti. It is the breath of things which is the eternal. So he says, very good. Now meditate further. And he goes further and meditates. And then he sees, no, this is not just living forms, but there is thought. And this thought directs the breath of life, and living forms are moved by a certain thought. And then we can see the whole material universe expressing a certain thought. If you really look at it very symbolically, the river, the mountains, the galaxies, the sun, the quasars, everything, the black hole, it's a thought which is as if expressing itself in a material form. So he meditates and comes back and says that it is thought which is the eternal. So he says, meditate still further, and then he goes back and he sees all these ideas, different thoughts, they rejoin in one primal cause, and he comes back and says, Vijnanam Brahmeti. There is one original primal cause of all things, from which everything has emerged. So the father smiles and says, meditate still further. So he goes and then after a long time comes back with a aha experience and says, Anandam Brahmeti. All this is essentially Ananda which is unfolding itself. And if you really look at every smallest object in the material universe, it is as if dancing with joy. It's almost a mystic experience if you really go back and back and back. But surely we don't experience it as of now. The material scientist is very far from understanding it this way. And if you really go through this approach of purely material science, it will take long, maybe hundreds of years, but eventually we will hit this point. There will be needed certain leaps into our subjective dimensions of space. And therefore, humanity in its search for the ultimate reality has figured out different ways. So another way is psychological conceptions of God. Now here again we see that we are limited by not our reasoning and observation, but by our understanding of ourselves. So we have created God in human image. So if you ask a person who is cruel, what is God? He will say that God is a cruel tyrant. Somebody who believes in punishment and reward asks, what is God? God is the one who punishes us for our errors and rewards us for our virtues, punishes us for our sin. Someone else who is full of a heart of love, you ask him what is God, he will say that God is love who wipes out all our errors and lifts us always out. So as we grow in our psychological being and become aware of different dimensions, aspects of our own psychological nature, we equally start projecting onto that ultimate reality and say divine is this or that, and eventually we can literally say there are as many individuals, as many qualities, because each one is a certain combination. There is a certain truth in this, just like the story of Varuni and Prigo, in the sense all our psychological experiences actually derive from their, the truth is in the divine, but within us we experience it in a very limited way. Just as the boundlessness of the divine is experienced as the boundlessness of material space. Similarly, the divine love limits and diminishes itself, and in human nature it becomes a love tainted with hate and jealousies and fears and possessiveness, momentary thrills, etc. etc. Similarly, the divine Ananda changes into human beings into temporary joy, pleasure, and pain, and so on and so forth. So, every human aspect, human faculty, be it will or knowledge, is derived from a host of divine qualities from which different aspects of our human psychology emerge. That's why in the Vedas it is said that there are 333 gods, or some would say 333 crores, 33 crore gods, or 33 gods. It depends on how we interpret it. That's not the point. But people differentiated some main qualities and they called it a godhead in the sense that they are aspects of the eternal, and we too, by uplifting these qualities, can become a power or force of the eternal. So if we purify love, we can become one with divine love and thereby embody and express divine love in a human form. So this is another line of approach. And here again, after discovering all these different aspects or qualities of the divine, we discover the great fusion and say that there is the one who is Anantagun. And going one step further, we could say he is Nirgunan Guni. That's how the Gita puts it, that he is without any gunas and yet out of him infinite qualities come. So that's how we have Vishnu Sahasranam and Lalita Sahasranam, 1,000 names of the Lord. So this is another kind of approach, and as I said, both have their own validity, both have their own incompleteness, and both have their own usefulness in our approach to the divine. Then there is of course the mystic approach. Now mystic approach leads us still further. It leads us into the deepest penetralias of existence, as Sri Aurobindo says. It means to actively engage with yoga through a process of interiorization rather than intellectualization. The difference is that in intellectualization we can form conceptions of God, and while it is good to start with a conception, but this conception can also become a limitation. So let's say in certain cults we have a certain conception that God is sound and light, or in some other that God is nothingness. Now what we don't realize is this conception limits our experience of God. That's why Sri Aurobindo says in the Synthesis of Yoga that we must start with an integral conception of the divine. So when Mother was asked what is the integral conception of the divine, she very beautifully describes step by step. For those who are interested to read it at length, it's in Collected Works of the Mother, Volume 8, the very first question. So she says that all of us start with the conception of the divine, whether he's compassionate, and then we divide this creation into two. One that is divine and the other naturally, which does not match with that conception, and that is undivine. So there are things which are regarded as divine, all the beautiful things, good things, and there are others which are regarded as undivine. But as we proceed further and further in our search and widen, then it becomes impossible to say what is divine and what is undivine, because we touch that bedrock of oneness and we see that, well, all that we call as undivine in our narrow conception is also divine. Now this raises a big confusion in the mind as to then what is this undivine, and can we say that really brutality and cruelty is also divine? Well, that's where we have a conception, integral conception of the divine, that divine is not just a static passive presence within or behind nature. a kind of approach that certain mystics take. But also, creation has emerged out of him. And creation is an expression of this one who is the source and origin of all things. And this creation is constantly moving towards a greater and greater manifestation of that which is at its core and center as the source of all things. Which means there are things which are divine in the beginning, but as there is a passage of time, the unfolding takes place, then it becomes undivine. In the sense that divine and undivine become a question of action. So if I have to act, since I am moving from one step to another, then something which is divine at one level becomes undivine at another level. And we can take this famous example of Buddha leaving his family and walking away. Now, is it a divine act or an undivine act? To those who cannot look beyond their families, who are still in that narrow frame, for whom the family is just a material family. Though family itself, one can discover material family, psychological family, family of common interest, family of common enjoyments, and eventually a deep psychic and spiritual family. But most human beings are limited in their narrow material frame. So if you ask them who is God, they will say ki my parents are my God. It's perfectly fine for them. But at another level you discover that, well, parents have their own fallibilities, they are also limited beings, and you have to widen and see that this is the original archetype, the parent of this creation. So then you pass beyond the family. So Buddha's quest has reached a point where if he stays with the family and regards his parents as God, he cannot go further. So what was fine and divine at one point of time becomes undivine at another. So the same applies at every level. Humanity and at its early stages needed hard prick of sensations. So if you really look at it, people used to fight with spears, cutting people, and they used to take a great joy in that. But now we have moved further. So we start with this integral conception that the divine is not just a passive presence. That's how the Buddha saw him, and many others experienced as a permanent beyond manifestation. So they created a rift between, or a division between, creation and God. So what is God? He is the stable basis. So they went beyond creation and entered into that state of consciousness, which is impersonal, personal. We'll come to that a little later. But they created a divide between the divine and creation. Here it may be good to clarify the term God and divine. Now, actually, they are interchangeable terms at certain level, but the reason why Sri Aurobindo has used the word divine more often, and the mother almost always, is because the conception of God has become too Semitic. So, God is somebody sitting out there with a beard, with a carrot and rod. So, God is somebody who punishes. He's become very human. So the conception of God has been so much spoiled. So they prefer the word divine. God creates a feeling he is out of this world. But divine is beyond this world as well as flows into this world. So at least now we have to start with this source is not just away, but it is the origin. So it will flow into whatever is. So it becomes not just transcendent but also cosmic. And within cosmos, each object, it will also flow into each object. So it's not just cosmic but also individual. And we can take an example. So we can say Ganga Mata is the sublime presence. Now this is another way to understand the divine. It's by images. These images are very interesting. They are used in the Upanishads also. So take this image of Ganges. Now Ganges is a presence. Now even if you don't have the Ganges, physically it dries up. It should not, but let's say it dries up. The presence of the Ganges is still a fact. That's how we have the Saraswati river, who is still regarded as the great river. It's a presence. It may manifest as a river as it did sometime, and again in the future it may manifest, but as of now it's not materially there. So the transcendent is that which exists regardless of creation. Even if creation ceased to be, even if there was a Mahapralaya, and not just the material universe but the vital and the mental universe and all the gods were to be dissolved, that will remain. So that is the transcendent. And then there is the cosmos. So cosmos is like the flowing water of the Ganges. So what is the Ganges? You say right from Gomukh till Ganga Sagar, it is Ganges. It's one Ganges. You don't say that this is another Ganges, that is another Ganges. It's all the same Ganges. And then the individual is at, you say, Haridwar ka ghat. So in the ghat you have the flowing of the Ganges, or you fill the pot and you bring in a pot the Ganges water to your home. So you don't say this is not Ganges. It is the Ganges, though it is now in a bottle. So the divine has three statuses which are together, and one, the transcendent, the individual, the cosmic, and the individual. And this truth is known not only in Indian mysticism but also in Christianity. It is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So this triple status of the divine. So within each one of us there is the divine presence, and he is like our individual master and guide. But he is all the time one with the cosmos. That's why when we discover the divine presence within, we discover the same presence in all, because we discover the individual self and the universal self are one. Though in each one he is unfolding differently. So this same presence is not sameness. The sign that somebody has discovered the divine presence is that he will not make a cult and ask everybody to believe what he believes or she believes, or do the same practices or have the same method. He will see that it's the same presence, but it is unfolding in different ways. This is a spontaneous discovery, and one discovers that simultaneously, even if creation were not to be, and even if the entire one's own being and the world being was dissolved, still there would remain the transcendent into whom both the two can lapse. So we have the transcendent, the cosmic, and the individual divine. Now this transcendent itself, now comes the different layers. Now this, within the cosmos there are several layers and planes, and at each plane he becomes the Godhead, the Deva. So you have the deity in Indian conception. You have who is God? Agni. Agni at the material level, he is the builder of forms. He is the boss out there. Now how is Agni God? Agni is a delegate from the eternal for this universe. So he becomes the presiding deity. So you have the solar fire. This entire creation starts from this tremendous wall of energy, which can be described as a huge fire with tremendous energy and light within it. That's how Agni is the presiding deity of material universe. He builds all forms. Or if you go at the life breath, then we say that Vayu is the God. So we see some of these Upanishads, Prashna Upanishad for example, which will say Agni is the God. Then he says Vayu is the God, because at each level these great Godheads are powers of the eternal. They come from the eternal, they preside over their cosmos, and they are always united in the eternal. So somebody at the pure material level will regard Agni as the God. That's why he is the first Godhead, because we start from there. So first people invoke the Agni as the Godhead. Of course Agni has several levels and layers. There is the inner Agni, there is the Agni in its own home of truth, but right now just for the sake of different universes. Similarly, somebody at the level of the prana, he will say pranayam is the way, and a vital person, by controlling the prana, you can actually come in touch with the cosmic breath which controls this universe, and you are one with that great breath. And a person with a more mystic bent of mind will say it is the breath of the Lord. And then if you go still further at the mental level, the ancient seers said Indra. Now what is Indra? He had eyes all over. So it's a consciousness of the mind. Mind can be uplifted to a level where it can see simultaneously all things together, which is what the Sahasrara is. So one will say, well, Indra is the deity. Now of course, subsequent to the Vedas, all these names change, their functions change. But that apart, at each plane, there is the God whom you can discover as the Godhead of that plane. And one can be, through that door, enter into the eternal. What about beyond the cosmos? And of course there is the cosmic divine. So beyond the cosmos, again there are planes of manifestation, and beyond the cosmos, the transcendent is often referred to as impersonal by some, and by some personal. Now impersonal, those who approach him as if he is nothing, they experience nothingness and impersonality. Those who experience him as a person, a being, they discover the supreme being who is behind. Now actually they are not antagonistic. Everything in universe is personal and impersonal at the same time. An atom is personal in the sense it's a form. And an atom is impersonal in the sense all the same forces are playing within each atom as anywhere else. As a human being, we are personal in the sense that people relate with us personally as a being. But we are as an individual form. But we are also impersonal. All the forces that move us move everybody else. So a time comes when you discover that, well, this is just a distinction that the mind creates artificially between personal and impersonal divine. A question people often raise, but how do we know he is a being? Now, this is very easy to answer. If we take it that the origin of creation is all conscious state. Now, why all conscious? Because consciousness is emerging. If it was a mechanical, inconscient nature, then out of it life and mind and consciousness would not emerge. So if there is an all conscious state, so there is a state of consciousness in which consciousness is fully aware of itself through consciousness. So what do we say someone who is fully aware of oneself? We say it's a being. Now being doesn't mean this form. It can take many forms. To the worshipper of Shiva, he may come as Shiva. To the worshipper of Krishna, he will come as Krishna. To the worshipper of Kali, he will come as Kali. But it is the same being who takes these different forms, provided we approach him in the transcendent sense. Now this transcendent, which is both personal and impersonal, that's how unfortunately the debate started between Nirgun Brahman and Sagun Brahman, because those who approached in one way, they said he is Nirgun Brahman and the others Sagun Brahman, and they fought with each other. Had they taken one step further, they would have discovered they are one and the same. It only is a question of how you approach it. Now this being who is both personal and impersonal at the same time is described in the highest experience of him is described as Satchidananda. So he has these three aspects which are fused in each other. He is Sat, his existence, so obviously he is true existence, because all other existences have come from him. So he is called Sat. And Sat Purush, because he is the true Purusha. All other Purushas means states of being have derived from that. So he is Sat because he is the true existence. Out of his substance, everything else has emerged. He is also Chidghan. There is a power in it. Power of self-awareness and power of world awareness. So he is also Chit. And all other little Chit, we all have a little bit of consciousness, even an animal has come from that. So he is Chidghan, Chid Shakti. And together the Sat and Chit Shakti sometimes conjured as the image of Ishvara and Ishwari, because you see masculine and feminine. Sat is pure existence and Chit is the power that brings out of that infinite existence countless possibilities. So she becomes Shakti. And their union is Ananda. So we have Sat Chit Ananda. They are all the time together. But beyond the mind, we have these three higher states of divine self-existence. So we have the pure Satlok, where it is the Sat aspect which is prominent. We have the pure Chidghan Lok, where the consciousness is prominent. And we have the Anand Lok, where Ananda is prominent. And connecting these to the higher world of Sat Chit Ananda, lower world of matter, life and mind, is the supramental consciousness. It is the consciousness with which the divine who is one becomes the many, is aware of the many and plays with the many. The moment one comes below the supermind, one forgets the one. If you go beyond it, you are aware only of the one. But in the supermind, like in a prism, you have one ray, white ray, becoming many rays, many different colors. So supermind is that state of consciousness. So now we can see the divine is one and infinite. He is in each atom of existence, in each particle of existence. He is in each human being. He is in this drift of galaxies. He is in each universes. He is beyond the universes. And all these, he is personal, impersonal at the same time. And all this together and beyond all this that human mind can conceive. So that becomes the divine. So this, because Sachidanand is still something which is conceivable, at least intellectually. So human mysticism, Indian mysticism went beyond it. It says, but where has all this come from? So it says, of that we can say nothing. That is that. Call it Par Brahman, call it Tao, from whom Sachidanand and all this play. For the sake of creation, out of himself he has shadowed forth Sachidanand for the sake of the play, and all this play proceeds from there. So we have now all these different ways of being of the one divine. We have the Sachidanand, we have the lower triplicity of creation at which he manifests, we have the Brahman, which is impersonal and personal, and we have in each individual there is the divine presence, and beyond these three we have it. Beyond is a way of saying, actually beyond it you can't define. It is Par Brahman, which cannot be defined or described. It's beyond, that's why it's called beyond. Now I would like to read something. As I said that these are images, but mystic experience we must have, and the ways when mother was asked how to find this divine presence, because that is a perfect way of knowing. So she said, seek him. Seek him with all your aspiration. Not just 5 minutes, I am seeking the divine. That's not enough. Seek him because he is hidden behind all these works. We have this who, in the blue of the sky, in the green of the forest, whose is the hand that has painted the globe. When the winds were asleep in the womb of the ether, who was it roused them and bade them to blow? So behind everything, behind the laughter of a boy, blush of a girl, behind everything he is hidden. And then he says, but these are his works and his veils and his shadows. But who is he then? By what name is he known? Is he Brahma or Vishnu, man or a woman, bodied or bodiless, twin or alone? And then he ends up by describing even in the densest darkness he is hidden there. It is he in the sun who is ageless and deathless, and into the midnight his shadow is thrown. When darkness was dense and covered with darkness, he was seated within it, immense and alone. So when mother was asked that, does the inconscient aspire? She said it is the divine in the inconscient who aspires. Now when we look at things from the divine angle, everything changes. Who aspires within us? Divine within us who aspires, who lights up this flame. Now we understand the Vedic Agni within man, which now climbs further and seeks to go further and further. That energy which is there in material universe, in human being, it takes the form of the divine will, the divine energy, which is seeking to go further and further. But this, of course, is a well-known poem. I want to read from another poem, which is amazing. It's called Par Brahman, because that's where our thought stops. Beyond it, thought cannot climb. So Par Brahman, just a few lines. It's a long poem. It starts beautifully. These wanderings of the sun, these stars at play, in the due measure that it shows of old, not only these, but all the immense array of objects that long time, far space can hold, are divine moments. Sharobhav of the Gita. Are divine moments. They are thoughts that form their vision in the self of things august, and therefore grandly real. Rule and norm are processes that they themselves adjust. So they are realities of a deeper existence. So the world is real because it has emerged out of the divine and dwells in the divine, goes back to the divine. Now see, where is it? He is hidden inside. The self of things is not their outward view. A force within resides. That force is he. It's the Shakti which is built these worlds. His movement is the shape of things we knew. Movement of thought is space and time. So the moment mind is born, there is space and time. Not the individual mind as we understand, but a cosmic mind which divides things into different finites. A free and sovereign master of his world within, he is not bound by what he does or makes. So it's beyond the universe. Now he's talking of the transcendent. He is not bound by virtue or by sin. Awake who sleeps, and when he sleeps, awakes. So in poetry you can, express it so beautifully. He is the one who sleeps in matter, is stunned in the rock. He is the one who is awake in plant. He is the one who smiles from a flower. He is the one who thinks in man. He is the one who aspires in the seer and the sage. And he becomes the vision, and he becomes the object of pursuit. He is not bound by waking or by sleep. neither day nor night. He is not bound by anything at all. Laws are that he may conquer them. To creep or soar is at his will, to rise or fall. He is beyond all the laws and rules and norms. So when people are in little sects, then they create all these. The narrower you are, the more you have the set of rules from fasting in this day and doing this and doing that. But the more we enter into freedom, we discover the utter freedom of the divine. One from of old possessed himself above, who was not anyone nor had a form. So divine is self-aware of himself. Swayam Prakash. Nor yet was formless. So he is neither form nor formless. Neither hate nor love could limit his perfection. Peace nor storm. He is, we cannot say, for nothing too is his conception of himself unguessed. When he hides himself, he says, I am nothing. And when he hides himself from our view, we discover nothing. We say there is no being out there. It's nothingness. Because we have approached him from that angle. That's why Sri Aurobindo says how important is faith. And Mother speaks of, if you believe the divine punishes, he will be cruel and far for you because you need it. But if you believe that he lifts you every time you fall, he will come and lift you every time you fall. And she says, people don't know how important is faith. How it connects us with that aspect of the divine in which we have faith. And Sri Aurobindo says that to the nihilist, he waits in the bosom of annihilation. Because we believe that, no, there is nothing. So at the end you discover nothing and you say, see, I was right. Of course you were right. You are always right. This is how human thought proceeds. But if we could only say that whatever I may have discovered is nothing before what I am yet to discover, that's why great humility is required on this path. And the more you discover the divine, the more humble you become. Because you discover that really you know nothing. He who knows and he who inspires us to knowledge. He wakes up in us and we call it knowledge. That too will come. He is, we cannot say, for nothing too is his conception of himself unguessed. He dawns upon us and we would pursue. But who has found him or what arms possessed? How can you possess the infinite? You can be possessed by the infinite. You can become one with him. You can identify with him. But you can't say that you have possessed the infinite. He is not anything, yet all is he. He is not all, but far exceeds that scope. Both time and timelessness sink in that sea. Time is a wave and space a wandering drop. Within himself he shadowed being forth. This is the Satchidananda because it's beyond all things. So how does he connect with it? So he shadowed a being forth, which is a younger birth, a veil he chose to half conceal him. Knowledge, nothing worth, save to have glimpses of its mighty cause. Knowledge is what? It is his faculty of knowing. So when it awakens in us, we are able to know a little bit, just a glimpse. But beyond knowledge is delight. And high delight, a spirit infinite, that is the fountain of this glorious world. Delight that labors in its opposite, faints in the rose and on the rack is curled. This was the triune playground that he made, mind, life and body. They emerged from, if you see, Satchidananda. And one there sports a while, he plucks his flowers and by his bees is stung. He is dismayed, flees from himself and has his sullen hours. All is he. What a vastness towards which Sri Aurobindo carries us. In the last stanza, the Almighty One knew labor, failure, strife. Knowledge forgot, divined itself again. He forgets himself and then rediscovers. He made an eager death and called it life. He stung himself with bliss and called it pain. Can't help reading the next one is God. Thou who pervadest all the worlds below, yet sittest above. So God is not just sitting out there in heaven. He is there even in hell. What a relief that our friend and master is even there, so we don't have to worry. He waits for us everywhere with his arms, even in darkness. Master of all who work and rule and know, servant of love. You can approach him through knowledge as I am not this body, I am not this sensations, I am not this thought, I am not these feelings, and eventually you arrive at who am I? This is the way of knowledge. So when you discover knowledge, you discover this is the master from whom this light of knowledge has emerged. Similarly, you can approach through works, nishkam karma, constant remembrance, and you will discover him as the master who alone is the sole doer. And I thought ignorantly that I am the doer or I am an instrument. All this was meaningless. But they were steps in the discovery. When you approach him through love, how does he come to us? What do you want, my child? I am your lover and beloved. So he becomes a servant. Can the divine become a servant? He can become everything. Servant of love. Thou who disdainest not the worm to be, nor even the clod. Therefore we know by that humility that thou art God. So the divine is, I think we need not qualify, all that we need to say is that the divine is